Tom Galucci here with the Mortgage Collaborative. Want to welcome you to the latest installment of TMC Tech Talk. And if this is your first time joining us, just know every other Thursday, I'm going to be joined by a special guest, heavily focused in mortgage tech, to kind of talk about current events, new innovations, consumer experience, and also highlighting our guests and their companies' direct contributions towards pushing forward innovation within the mortgage industry. So for our attendees, any questions, comments, suggestions on future discussion topics or industry leaders you'd like to see on Tech Talk, drop a note in the Zoom chat, or you can reach out to me or anybody on the Mortgage Collaborative team directly. And, we'll look forward to leveraging your suggestions. But on that note, I want to jump right in here and welcome in today's guest with we have a good friend of mine, longtime TMC preferred partner, David Berner, strategic planning and partnership manager with Notarize. Welcome in, David.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. And thank you to TMC as well for the opportunity.
Great to have you in here. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I always like to start up these discussions since nobody in their youth planned to end up in, their current role in the mortgage industry. Maybe you could kick things off, just giving us a little high level on your background and how you ended up, in the mortgage industry, and then kind of your current role with Notarize.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's either by blood or by accident, and I'm certainly the latter. First job out of school, proud University of Arizona alumni, go Cats. I sold advertising. I stunk up the joint. I was terrible, not very good at it. But I always knew I enjoyed sales, enjoyed talking to people, business development, all that good stuff. And one of my best friends in the world was a loan officer at the time. This was, sort of during the heyday of HARP, and he was doing very, very well for himself and really encouraged me to get into the business. And, once I kind of got my bearings and got started with it, I really enjoyed it. It was a great sort of, as a loan officer, it's a great intersection of things that I really liked, the personal nature of it, the problem solving angle of getting folks into homes and things of that nature. It was just a great fit. So as I, spent some time in there, I was loan officer, team leader for about 6 years. You start to look around, right? And you see sort of the differences and some of the friction that exists in the way that our business does things versus other businesses that we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And one of those, of course, is the closing. At the time, of course, there wasn't any sort of option to do an electronic closing at scale. And it's a question you get every now and then. Hey, I signed all my initial disclosures electronically. Well, why can't I sign my closing disclosures electronically as well? Didn't really have a good answer. Interestingly enough, when I was talking to Notarize about potentially taking up a role, I had 2 separate sets of borrowers in my pipeline that were going on separate vacations to Europe. And of course, as we all know, prior to online notarization, Notarize wanted me to do that as an embassy closing, which I don't need to. We've all lived those or tried to do them. They're a challenge to use a family-friendly word, right? So I said, hey, this is the answer I've been looking for in many ways, and it's right here in front of me. So have been, taking that jump onto the tech side and been working on it ever since. So day-to-day at Notarize, work with both our lender and title partners around digitizing processes and, also kind of helping bridge that gap between the technology that you need to do that, and also speaking to the operational angle of it as well and the things that you need to do to realize it at scale.
No, I love it. And it makes a ton of sense too. I mean, you know how it is. This industry is so relationship driven. And, I think that's always the common thread between professionals, whether they have a love or passion for mortgage specifically, or just, being able to interact and create business with like-minded folks. Type A personalities tend to flock towards our industry. And I know everybody is seething at home right now, just dying to get out and get back together in person and really, enjoy that interaction and kind of thrive off of it again. So makes a ton of sense and kind of dovetails nicely into, what I wanted to kind of talk with you about next. In talking about current events, obviously the prevailing pandemic, top of mind always to everyone and everything. And we're right on the 1-year anniversary of COVID kind of turning our world upside down in so many ways. And, uniquely enough, with your role in the company at Notarize, you guys are right on the forefront of, helping bridge that gap in a remote type setting. specific on the remote and e-closing side, love your perspective on how the pandemic has accelerated digital trends, that e-mortgage and e-closing advocates have been pushing, for adoption for what feels like 10, 20 years now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I truly believe this. We made a decade worth of progress in 1 year. I think everyone that's been working on this very hard. A lot of other folks in the network of TMC members and preferred partners have been working on this much longer than I have. So I think they've kind of put things in motion, but it's really just accelerated a lot of trends I think that we were already seeing. It's easy to kind of break them up into a couple different categories. I think one would be legislative and regulatory to start with. So we're now at a point here in 2021 where we've got, I think it's 30 states now officially that have a permanent remote online notarization legislation on the books. Just to put that kind of growth in perspective, when I joined Notarize, there was really only a handful of states that allowed their state's notaries to conduct business this way. I want to say maybe 5 or 6. Now we're at a point where you've got a simple majority, if you will, of states that have permanent online notarization legislations. I think as a function of the pandemic as well, you saw a lot of state governments put in temporary authorizations that I think are a good way as sort of a bridge towards a more permanent bill and permanent standards. So that's just proliferating and getting significantly easier. I think another thing as well would be, not just the legislative side, but also just fast adoption for some of the folks that we rely on to get things done in our business, specifically on the title and escrow side of the business. So Alta put out a number here, ballpark about 60% of title agents have adopted some sort of e-closing technology during the pandemic. So it was one of those things where it went from a nice to have to a need to have almost overnight. And I think what's fascinating too is if you had asked me going into 2020, what sort of side of the business is maybe holding up broad adoption, I would have frankly said title, but I think it's the opposite now. And again, it's a little bit unfair to the lenders because there's some structural things that are improving as well. And we'll certainly get to those here in our conversation as well. But I think for lenders who haven't chatted with their title agents recently or those partners that they work with hand in hand, I think you may be surprised how far along they are. They may already be doing some transactions that you're not involved in, with their seller and cash transactions on that side of the business, using remote online notarization, using e-closing technology there. I think too, there's going to be a lot of demand coming as well. We've all lived our lives this way for the last year and a half, right? I mean, this is how I've been talking to my family is over Zoom. And I think we were all relatively familiar with video conference technology. I mean, that wasn't something that came about as a pandemic. Most of us have FaceTime, right? And these sort of things, but those are for day-to-day things, right? It's for me to talk to my friends who are on the other side of the country, talk to my family, put funny filters on Snapchat. Now you've got people who use it for business, right? And we're conducting business this way. We're doing meetings this way. Now we're doing e-signatures, we're closing loans this way. So I think it's going to be really interesting for lenders here as we move out of the pandemic to see the demand side of the equation shifting because people's habits are changing. And this, video conferencing, digital aspects of it are just more and more intertwined into what we do on a day-to-day basis, independent of housing finance.
You're right. It's not a foreign concept as it may have been year and a half ago to those that didn't have the iPhone and weren't, FaceTiming on a regular basis. Everyone's kind of figured out how to navigate Zoom or Teams or whatever forum you're using for your video conferencing. And we'll talk a little bit about that later too, and how that's kind of evolving consumer preferences as well. One question I had just based off some of your feedback, and I remember this being kind of a hairy issue back in March and April, where, to your point, a lot of states in a reactionary fashion were putting in temporary authorization legal language to allow for remote transactions essentially to take place. Have you seen any since then actually come through with law beyond temporary legislation in place for their states?
Yeah, I don't know if I can give you an exact example of that sort of order of operations, but I definitely think that when they look at the temporary authorizations, it's definitely saying, okay, this is a step in the right direction in many respects. I think the temporary authorizations were a function of the pandemic. I absolutely think they can be improved upon. And I think that helps keep everyone using this sort of technology safe. And what I mean by that is hey, we know what the guardrails are. This is permanent legal language that's been built into the state's laws. This is what a notary needs to do in this jurisdiction versus another one there. So I think we're really, really encouraged by it. I think one example might be the state of New York, that has temporary authorization and is now talking about this in the context of a permanent bill. So I'd venture to say if we, fast forwarded a couple months there's probably going to be a concrete example of a state that went from temporary authorization to permanent legislation. But as I mentioned, I mean, look, we're at a point now where you've got over 25 states, over 30 states have permanent legislation in there. So the states that don't have it, are, it's fair to say, in the minority now. But there are, sort of nuances there in states that, still need to be addressed there, right, through the legislative and rulemaking process. I think a great example would be attorney states. Those questions are ongoing, but, we're seeing movement in their legislatures and chambers towards making things permanent for sure.
Well, and I've got to imagine too, it's, if anything, a learning exercise for some of the states that put in place temporary authorization legalities. Where, when you then allow it, you go through the motions of security related issues or legal compliance challenges. It only probably helps strengthen the legislation that comes forth when they do come together on a permanent bill or law to allow a RON transaction to take place.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, these states, they don't have to do it from scratch, right? You've got all the other examples there. You've of course got the model legislation that Alta and MBA worked on there about 2 years ago or so when I got to Notarize. And of course, there's efforts at the national level as well that are supported, by all three of the major trade groups, Alta, MBA, and NAR, pushing for this at sort of a federal level there. So, it's and of course you got the MISMO standards as well. Something that I worked on as well that can help lenders understand and shop for this technology and make sure that they don't have to figure this all out from scratch. There's certainly things that you can use, to guide your decisions from a business level, but I also think too, from a legislative standpoint, no one has to go first now, right? And I do think it's certainly just, as habits change, as we have a more permanent workforce, I think this sort of thing is going to be an expectation really, from a consumer, and they're going to be just confused why they can't do it in many ways. So.
Absolutely. And just a reminder to everybody, TMC Tech Talk, Tom Glucci here with David Berner, Strategic Planning and Partnership Manager with Notarize. Any questions that you have for David, feel free to pop them in the chat. And if we've got time at the end, we'll gladly address those. Before kind of moving on, David, would love your perspective too on maybe some of the efficiencies that the industry has been able to realize through the advancement of adoption, kind of somewhat forced through the pandemic, on particular the e-closing transaction and as it relates to e-notes too.
Yeah, I think that's a really big one because there's just so much opportunity there that I think people are starting to be able to quantify in terms of that. Because I think we can all look at the problem objectively and say, okay, there's manual processes that have been digitized already that have created a lot of efficiencies in our business. You could think about the transfer of most of initial disclosures using to be paper-based are now electronic. You're saving on postage, you're saving on these hidden costs, right? And I think we're seeing that, as part of this sort of e-closing equation. So one statistic that, our good partners and friends at Fannie Mae shared is that they're seeing significantly faster delivery with e-notes and loans that have e-notes as collateral versus paper versions of that. So I think it was a median number. They're saying it's about 14 days for delivery of a paper note. If you do an electronic version of the note, it's 8 days. And if you think about, your cost savings for that, if let's say your warehouse line costs you $25 a day per loan, ballpark figure, that might be a generous number. You take that 150 and multiply it by your entire pipeline, you're going to see some numbers that are pretty darn exciting. So that's forward looking. I'd also say too, just some of the big benefits, of course, are going to be on post closing as well, right? We've been talking about that for years, is that, you'll eliminate some of these activities of chasing down missed signatures, additional notary meetings, right? That can impact your title and settlement partners. I think also too, just, getting more comfortable from a remote workplace standpoint. I mean, I remember when I was originating, a lot of our processors and underwriters worked remotely here too. And that was pre-pandemic, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of that shifting. And I think that's great for lenders, right? Is because you'll be able to compete for talent, get folks from places that may not just necessarily be in your backyard, but surface more folks to your operation, because of that sort of work from home model. I did tell Tom this. I don't think people will be training new loan officers remotely. I think that's going to stay in. I think it's going to stay in office. And as a former new loan officer, I would advocate for that strongly. But your folks that are more seasoned and able to be more autonomous there with less supervision, I think you'll see a little bit more of that too.
No, for sure. Well, I'm gonna do a little pontification with you here. As we're closing in on the spring buying season, are there any overarching trends you're expecting to see as far as the growth of digital closing transactions over the course of the year? And even to put you on the spot a little bit, any thoughts on, what adoption trends or growth we'll continue to see based on what we saw in 2020?
Yeah, I think, look, I think it's getting easier. I think is sort of just the easiest way to answer that and the fastest way, but there's a couple different ways that it's getting easier. So when I talked about the title and settlement angle, I think you're going to have, again, based on that number, that we got from Alta, you already have a majority of title agents that have adopted this. And I think sometimes people assume that they're not as far along as they actually are. So certainly encourage you to talk to folks if they haven't done e-closings yet. Again, sellers is a great example, right? If you talk to any title agent, they'll tell you it's impossible to get sellers to come to closing. Remote online notarization and e-closings solve that problem. And take it even a step further from a business case standpoint, what if they have a contingent sale and we need to have a fast funding so they have the money that afternoon? You're going to look like an incredible partner being able to do these sort of things, funding faster on your side so the sellers can get to their closing. So I think you're going to see continued acceleration of that. I think another area is just more broad e-note acceptance. So of course, you've always been able to go agency direct with their permission. Of course, you need to go talk to those folks directly to get that type of arrangement set up there. But I think we're seeing some of the correspondent lenders and folks sit up and take a look at this. A lot of them have completed eVault integrations, which is a foundational step towards being ready. So certainly encourage you to have your secondary market team talk to those folks, understand where they are with an e-note process. I think the question is no longer should we do this from their perspective. It's how do we do this and how do we fit this into our existing policies and procedures? And hey, there's plenty of benefits for secondary market participants in this as well. I'd love to know how much money warehouse lenders are spending shipping collateral all over the country. That goes away with an electronic note. Or as Michael Jones talked about on a panel we did for the TMC event, all the time and energy you're spending chasing after missing paper notes, right? That goes away in an electronic version there as well. So and I just think it's going to be a little bit easier here for folks, because you're going to have just, again, more demand, more options for this. And, to talk about something we'll get to a little bit later, of course, just be, solutions providers like us being more integrated in the technology stack that you're already using, up to this point and maybe even before the closing as well.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, from an efficiency standpoint, it just makes too much sense. And I think and Notarize is hand in hand in this too, but the MERS and the GSEs have done just a great job over the last, I think year or two in particular, and I'm sure well beyond that, and helping kind of explain out the infrastructure that's needed from a lender standpoint when they finally make that decision internally, like we've got to make a commitment to this now. That you've got, the infrastructure of partners, your evil, and a process set in place that you can hit the ground running with a hybrid or electronic transaction and, realize those gained efficiencies instead of, playing catch up to a certain degree.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, for lenders as well, like this question has been answered, right? It's now a time for you to sit here and think about, okay, what do my processes look like today and where do I want to go, and start making those evaluations within your organization. If you haven't had these conversations already, getting a team together. I think one thing that we've learned, since we've had rapid adoption ourselves over the last year, I mean, we grew, I think 800% year over year as an organization in 2020, is that this is obviously heavy software, of course, right? Software that we're using to develop this, but it's an operational change. So, getting those key stakeholders involved early in the process and involved in the buying process too, I think is a really big key. And, your closing manager is going to be a huge part of this. So make sure to get those folks involved. And there's lots of benefits for secondary as well on that side too, internally.
Absolutely. Just a reminder, TMC Tech Talk, Tom Glucci here with David Berner with Notarize. Any questions you got, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will address those if time allows. David, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. We had an e-closing podcast a little bit earlier this week. And a big part of the conversation was around, simplifying the consumer experience to enhance ease of use as well as help grow adoption. And I would love your perspective on, where you see innovation on the tech side continuing to trend, specific to Ron for really enhancing that consumer experience.
Yeah, so I think one example of that would be some of the ways that we can connect, essentially your stakeholders, your closing team to the transaction and allow them to participate. So one thing we've spent a lot of time on working is essentially a participation feature that allows for folks like your loan officer, your real estate agent, your title agent to join in the meeting as it's going on. So they can be there, similar to what we're doing right now, right? But imagine if I have a question for my title agent. Hey, what's a deed of trust, right? They can be right there to answer that question on the spot. And so I think that transparency is great for consumers because at that point, they've already gotten a big preview of the documents. That's an innovation in and of itself, being able to see the closing documents before you sit down and sign them. As we all know, some folks go line by line. They want to read every single page of it. And this can certainly help out for those folks. I think another example too is integrations that we're pursuing here as well. So, being able to exist within things like a point of sale system where a borrower has essentially spent their entire journey, right? Lenders have chosen these to essentially be the place where the borrowers are uploading their supporting documents, signing loan disclosures. If there's a redisclosure, that's where you go to get those e-signatures completed. And so I certainly think that's going to be easier for lenders there too, or excuse me, for consumers, to better understand the expectations for them as well. So ultimately, I think, the technology is just getting stronger for folks. And again, the consumer expectations, I think, are going to be radically different as we sort of open up here again, as they were pre-pandemic. As a result of that. So we've also actually allowed realtors as well to join these calls, mobile participation. So imagine a real estate agent who's between listings or between showings, being able to join right from their cell phone, join that audio video call with the signer and be right there for them. So certainly continuing to iterate out on the product and make it better in session there too.
No, that's a great point. I mean, everybody was so focused for so long on the integration component into the LOS, is that real key, point of adoption to take off from. But I mean, to the points that you mentioned, pandemic, more millennial buyers entering the marketplace, like this is where they're at, and you got to meet them there, and being able to have that seamless experience through pre-application, through post-close, directed through that point of sale, it just amplifies that process for, a consumer preference, efficiency standpoint. I mean, I could go on, but it just makes all the sense in the world to make it as easy for the end consumer as possible.
Yeah, I think, the LOS integrations, I mean, obviously we work with Encompass and Ellie Mae very closely. So I think from an operational standpoint for lenders, that's really, really important because that's ultimately the endpoint where your closer is going to be interacting with our software and placing an order, so that's going to help your team get up and running. But ultimately for the consumer, if you're looking for that kind of that tight, or the expectation setting on the front side with the loan officers, right? Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Borrower, you're going to use this website that I'm going to send you here for the entire time. You can sign your documents here, upload your conditions here, and you're going to close here. Very, very straightforward. And again, it's something we expect. Like if I'm going on Amazon to buy a book, I expect it to all be on Amazon. So it's the Amazon effect, as we like to say. So it's certainly, driving consumer expectations. And, Tom's mentioned the millennials, right? I'm a millennial, but I'm getting old. Gen Z is right around the corner. I mean,
right?
If you think we're tech forward, millennials, I mean, we remember before computers. I remember when we got the internet for the first time in my house. Gen Z doesn't have that, right? And for many of them, the internet is just here. It's not even the devices that we're using right now to do this video conference. So if you think, our expectations are high around technology, just wait till my little sister's buying a house in a couple of years.
Yeah, to any Gen Zers on the line, there probably are none, which is a good thing, but don't make fun of us because we're still using computers here to conduct this.
That's right.
I mean, it's so true though. And as we close out here, obviously, I want to take the time to shine the spotlight on Notarize directly. And for all those with us on Zoom, I've thrown in the chat as well just a link for Notarize Rewired for real estate coming up on April 7th. So I want to give you the opportunity to plug that, as well as, give us some perspective on what Notarize is currently focused on, and, even to the extent that you can, maybe a teaser on what's coming down the line.
Yeah, sure. So we're really excited about Rewired this year. We're doing it a little bit differently. As some of you may know, Notarize is, not just in real estate, but also in, non-real estate. And we help out folks who come in with one-off notarizations in their normal lives, right? You need a license notarize, something of that nature. So April 7th is going to be our real estate focus, sort of breakout, if you will. Had a chance to take a peek at the agenda. I think it's really, really interesting because we're going to spend a lot of time talking more about how to get up and running, more tactical information, things that we've learned and things that have been taught to us by our lender partners, and less on the 101 side, I think. So I think that's going to be really helpful for folks, and we're really looking forward to that. And we'll be releasing agenda and notes out there for folks here very soon. From what we're working on, I think from a Notarize standpoint, it's clear that our biggest focus here in this year and beyond is going to be integrations and partnerships. And so to talk a little bit about some of the ones that are up and running, I mentioned Encompass, our loan origination software. So Encompass users can place orders with Notarize, and we actually had lenders now using it to do full remote online notarization closings there, ordered from Encompass, pushed out to the borrower, and right back to your LOS. So tremendous operational efficiency for your closers there, allows them to move quicker, get more loans out the door, and fund them faster there. On the title production side as well, we're live with Resware. So if you have partners that use that, they have an integrated experience as well. A couple others that are coming here as well. Can't say names just yet, but are very close to the finish line. And again, a big focus there. As I mentioned, a lot of title adoption has driven that, and that's been a big ask for folks. Again, hey, this is the system we use. We want to interact with it. Still want to use Notarize, but it's great that it lives there in that hub. And then on the front side of the transaction as well, I recently had the great opportunity to speak at the Simple Nexus conference. So those are folks that we're going to be working with as well on the integration side, very aligned with that thesis there about the those softwares and being able to exist where the borrower hub is as well. And then on the digital document side, TMC preferred partner Docutech, another great partner of ours that we're working with there. We're very, very excited to continue that great work, and getting those digital documents to be able to work with Notarize there, automatic tagging, more efficiency, and just continuing to make this better. So we're very, very excited and hope to have you at Rewired, of course. And thanks, Tom, for putting that in the chat there as well. Also happy to talk with folks about their e-closing strategies and, helping them out, get them where they want to go.
Well, yeah, I mean, happy to promote. I think it's so smart from a content standpoint. I think we've spent enough time over the past few years on a lot of the 101 components for Ron and e-closing. And I think that's what lenders are really craving, is that tactical expertise on, how do I enhance adoption or streamline my process further? Or if I haven't gotten that step yet, how do I effectively create my infrastructure and have a great game plan to hit the ground running with electronic transactions? So I'm eager to see that full agenda when it comes out. And reminder here, April 7th is the day, Rewired specific for real estate. So we will also incorporate, link direct towards the registration for the site in our follow-up correspondence to the attendees from today's discussion. And I'm excited for everything you've got in the works industry-wide, but specifically with our partners too. A lot of great integration work currently behind the scenes that's only going to streamline this process. So I'm excited to see that really take flight over the course of the year.
Definitely, we're very, very focused on that, and I think we're already starting to see dividends from this approach as well. So, and of course, folks we haven't partnered with, I'm the person to talk to. Certainly would love to have a conversation about it. So.
Awesome. Well, David, always a pleasure to get to spend some time with you. Really appreciate you being my guest again today. Reminder to our listeners, be on the look for the podcast and YouTube links for on-demand viewing, and share those out with others in your organization that couldn't join us today, maybe get some value from the discussion. And, we'll look forward to seeing you again 2 weeks from today on March 18th. I'll be joined with Emily Shapiro from First American Docutech, who David mentioned you guys got some interesting technology enhancements in the work with.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Tom, and thanks TMC for having us. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, David. And thank you everybody for joining us. And until we see you again, if you're talking TMC, you're talking tech. So be well, friends.